She left under the cover of rain, dumping 3 children on my porch with nothing but a flimsy promise to return in a few months. It took her 10 years to come back. When she finally did, she did not bring an apology. She brought the police and a warrant for my arrest. She called it kidnapping. I call it the day she finally learned that even a mother's patience has a breaking point. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for the last 7 years, my life has been defined by the quiet discipline of a woman who has nothing left to lose. I live in a small, weathered bungalow in a coastal town in Oregon where the fog rolls in thick every morning and stays until noon. Since my husband passed, I have curated a solitary existence. I wake up at 5 o'clock. I drink my coffee black while watching the grey waves crash against the rocks. I volunteer at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Everything in my world had a place, and everything was in its place. That was until the night the headlights cut through my front window and shattered my peace. My relationship with my daughter, Tiffany, had been eroding for a decade. To her, I was not a mother. I was a safety net she only acknowledged when she was falling. We spoke perhaps once a month, usually when she needed $20 or a character reference for a landlord. She was 32 years old, but she moved through life with the chaotic impulsiveness of a teenager. I loved her, but I did not like her choices, and I had learned the hard way that offering advice to Tiffany was like screaming into a hurricane. It was a Tuesday night, raining hard enough to drown out the sound of the ocean. When the doorbell rang, I knew it was trouble. No one visits a widow at 10 o'clock at night in a storm unless something is broken. I opened the door and found Tiffany standing on the porch, soaked to the bone. But she was not alone. Huddled behind her were 3 children. "Mom, please." "You have to let us in," Tiffany stammered, her mascara running in dark streaks down her pale cheeks. I stepped back, ushering them into the warm light of the hallway. I recognized the 2 older ones, of course. Leo was 10 now, tall and lanky with wary eyes. Mia was 7, clutching a dirty stuffed rabbit. But the baby in the carrier on the floor was a stranger to me. I did not even know she had given birth again. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice tight. "Tiffany, who is this?" "His name is Noah," she said, avoiding my gaze as she dropped 2 battered suitcases onto my hardwood floor. "Mum, I have an opportunity, a real one this time, but I can't. I can't take them with me. Not yet." She was moving too fast, her hands shaking as she pulled a crumpled envelope from her pocket and shoved it onto the entry table. "I just need a few months," she said, backing toward the door. 3 months, max. Once I get settled in Arizona, I'll send for them, I promise." I looked from her frantic eyes to the children. They were silent, watching us with a terrifying kind of resignation. They were used to this. They were used to being luggage. "You cannot just leave them here," I said, stepping between her and the door. "Tiffany, they have school. They have needs. Do you have their insurance cards? Do you have a power of attorney? You can't just dump 3 children on me in the middle of the night." "I don't have time for this," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Do you want them to end up in foster care? Because that is the alternative. Mum, if you don't take them, I don't know what I'll do." She pushed past me, opening the door to the driving rain. "I love you guys," she yelled over her shoulder, not looking at the children. "Be good for Grandma. I'll call you." And then she was gone. The taillights of her sedan faded into the mist, leaving me standing in the open doorway with the damp cold settling into my bones. I closed the door and locked it. The silence in the house was heavy. I looked at the children. Leo was staring at his shoes. Mia was trying to unbuckle the baby, her small fingers fumbling with the straps. "Grandma," Leo whispered, and the tremble in his voice nearly broke me. Is she coming back this time?" I wanted to lie to him. I wanted to tell him that his mother was a good person who was just going through a hard time. But I looked at the suitcases too light. Too few for 3 lives, and I felt the cold reality settling in. I am a widow on a fixed income. The cost of living in this country has skyrocketed. A gallon of milk costs $5. Health insurance is a nightmare of paperwork I haven't navigated in years. I had no legal rights to these children, no support checks coming in, and no energy for a second round of motherhood. But as I looked at Noah, who was finally freeing his arms from the straps and reaching out to a room he did not know, I knew the choice had already been made. "Come to the kitchen," I said, forcing my voice to be steady. "I will make some toast." I did not believe her. 3 months was a lie she told herself to sleep at night. As I buttered the bread for 3 hungry children, I felt a heavy certainty in my gut. This was not a visit. This was a handover. My daughter had not just left town, she had abandoned her life, and she had left me to pick up the pieces. The first month was not a life. It was a triage operation. I spent hours on hold with the school district, explaining why I did not have birth certificates or immunization records. I sat in fluorescent-lit waiting rooms with Noah screaming on my lap while I tried to fill out Medicaid forms with a shaking hand. My retirement, which I had carefully calculated to last me until I was 90, suddenly felt terrifyingly small. A trip to the grocery store used to cost me $50 a week. Now, with 3 growing children, the cashier would ring up $200, and I would feel a cold sweat prickle at my hairline as I swiped my debit card. The children were 3 distinct varieties of broken. Leo, at 10 years old, was angry at the world. He hoarded food under his bed: granola bars, apples, even slices of bread wrapped in napkins, as if he expected the pantry to lock him out at any moment. He watched me with the suspicion of a prisoner watching a new guard. Mia, 7, was the opposite. She was a shadow. If I moved to the kitchen, she was at my heels. If I went to the bathroom, she sat outside the door. She was terrified that if she let me out of her sight, I would vanish just like her mother. And Noah, only 18 months old, was a physical demand that my 55-year-old back was not ready for. He woke up 3 times a night, and I had to relearn the rhythm of sleeplessness. I approached motherhood differently this time. When I raised Tiffany, I was young, anxious, and desperate to be perfect. Now, I was tired but steady. I did not yell when Leo broke a vase in a fit of temper. I simply handed him a broom. "Clean it up." "Leo," I said calmly, "it is just glass." He looked at me, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the rejection. When it did not come, his shoulders dropped just a fraction of an inch. The calls from Tiffany were frequent in the first week, manic and full of excuses. By the 3rd week, they became sporadic. By the 2nd month, the silence began to stretch out like a long, dark shadow. I remember the last time we spoke during that initial period. It was a Tuesday. "I just need a little more time. Mom? Things are complicated here," she had said, her voice slurring slightly on the other end of the line. Tiffany. Leo has a fever of 102. He is asking for you. I had replied, clutching the receiver so hard my knuckles turned white. He needs his mother. Tell him. Tell him I love him. I have to go. The line went dead. I did not cry. I simply put the phone down and went to the kitchen to get the children's fever reducer. However, I did something else that night. I started a binder. I printed out the call logs showing the duration of our conversations. I saved every text message she sent, and more importantly, every text message she ignored. I printed the few emails where she promised money that never arrived. At the time, I told myself I was keeping a record so she could catch up when she returned. But deep down, in the part of my brain that handled survival, I knew I was building a defense. The town of Astoria is small, and secrets here have a short shelf life. Initially, the neighbors looked at me with pity. Then, the pity turned into a quiet acceptance. Mrs. Gable, the school secretary, stopped asking for parental signatures and started highlighting the line for legal guardian for me to sign. The pediatric dentist changed the billing address to my name without a word. I became the face at the pickup line, the voice on the emergency contact form. Our bond did not form through big, tearful moments. It formed in the quiet spaces. It happened when Leo stopped hoarding food because he realized dinner was served at 6 o'clock every single night, without fail. It happened when Mia finally slept through the night without waking up screaming. One evening, about 6 months in, we were sitting around the dinner table eating shepherd's pie. It was raining again, a soft rhythm against the window. "Grandma," Mia said, poking at her peas, "do you think Mum is lost?" I looked at the three of them. Leo stopped chewing, his eyes fixed on his plate. I could have offered them a soft lie. I could have said she was working hard for them. But I looked at the bruise on my own heart and decided they deserved better than false hope. "No, honey," I said, my voice steady. "She knows exactly where we are. But until she's ready to be here, I am not going anywhere." That night, after they were asleep, I went into the garage. I began clearing out my old sewing supplies to make room for a permanent bed for Leo. He was getting too big for the couch. I did not know what tomorrow would look like, or if Tiffany would roll up the driveway in a week or a decade. But I knew one thing: these children were not guests anymore. They were home. Time did not march on. It accumulated, layer by heavy layer, like sediment on the ocean floor. The 3 months Tiffany had pleaded for stretched into a year, then 5, and then a decade. Somewhere along the line, I stopped waiting for the phone to ring and started dreading it instead. To support 3 growing children, my quiet retirement had to be sacrificed. I traded my slow mornings and library volunteering for a full-time position as a receptionist at a busy dental practice. I clocked in at 7:30 every morning and left at 5 in the afternoon, my feet aching and my head swimming with insurance codes. It was not the golden years I had planned with my late husband, but there was a different kind of satisfaction in it. I was not building a retirement anymore. I was building 3 lives. I watched the milestones pass with a camera in one hand and a schedule in the other. I cheered when Leo walked across the stage for his 8th grade graduation, towering over his classmates. I held Mia's hand while she cried over her first heartbreak in her sophomore year. I taught Noah how to tie his shoes, how to ride a bike, and eventually, how to do long division. Through all of these moments, the fevers, the school plays, The parent-teacher conferences, the seat reserved for mother, remained empty. Tiffany did not send money. She did not send birthday cards. There were no surprise visits or tearful phone calls begging to hear their voices. She had simply evaporated. In the void of her absence, I developed a habit that bordered on obsession. I bought a thick, black ledger. Every time I bought groceries, I stapled the receipt to a page. Every time I paid for a doctor's appointment, a field trip, or a pair of sneakers, I logged the date, the amount, and the reason. I kept a folder of every report card that I signed, every permission slip where I had to check guardian instead of parent. One evening, Leo found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by piles of receipts and my ledger. He was 17 now, sharp and observant. "Grandma, why do you do this?" he asked, picking up a faded receipt from 4 years ago. "It is just a receipt for cough syrup." I looked up at him, my pen hovering over the paper. I could not tell him that this was my armor. I could not tell him that I was terrified that one day a judge might ask me to prove I was the one who cared. "Because memories fade, Leo," I said softly. "Ink does not. Someday, someone might ask who took care of you. I want to make sure the answer is in writing." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "Nobody needs to ask," he said, his voice dropping low. "We know who our mom is. She is sitting right here." That word, mom, hung in the air, heavy and sweet. They had started calling me that by accident years ago, and I had never corrected them. They knew who gave birth to them, but they also knew who stayed. To them, this house was not a temporary stopover. It was the only home Noah remembered. It was the place where they were safe. But beneath the routine and the warmth, a cold current of fear ran through me every single day. I knew the truth that the neighbors and the teachers ignored. I had no legal custody. I had no court order. I had nothing but a decade of possession. Every time a police car drove slowly down our street, my heart hammered against my ribs. Every time the phone rang with an unknown number, I froze. We were a family, solid and true, built on love and shared struggle. But we were built on sand. I knew that if Tiffany ever decided to return, all my ledgers and all my love might not be enough to stop her from taking them away. I was not just raising them, I was guarding them, waiting for a storm I prayed would never come. The car that pulled into my driveway at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon was not the rusted sedan from 10 years ago. It was a shiny, red rental with out-of-state plates. When the driver's door opened, I did not recognize the woman who stepped out immediately. The frantic, weeping girl in the rain was gone. In her place stood a woman with bleached blonde hair, a sharp leather jacket, and a look in her eyes that was as cold as a frozen lake. Tiffany walked up the path with a terrifying confidence. She did not knock. She simply turned the knob and pushed the door open, stepping into the living room where Noah was doing his homework and I was folding laundry. "Hey, Mum," she said, removing her sunglasses. "I am back." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Noah, now 12 years old, looked up from his math book. He stared at her with zero recognition. To him, she was a stranger. "Tiffany," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I stood up, placing the laundry basket on the sofa to create a barrier between us. "It has been 10 years. She waved her hand dismissively, as if I had pointed out a minor tardiness. "Yeah, well, Life gets crazy, she said, looking around the room, her eyes scanning the furniture, the television, and finally, the children. Where are the other two? Get them packed. I have a hotel room downtown. We are leaving in an hour. I felt the blood drain from my face. Excuse me. I am their mother, Mom. I am back on my feet. I have a boyfriend in Seattle who has a big house. We are ready to take them now. She said it with such casual entitlement that I felt a wave of nausea. She moved toward the hallway, but I stepped in front of her. You cannot just walk in here and take them, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. You have not called in 5 years. You do not know them. You do not even know what grade they are in. Tiffany stopped, her eyes narrowing. She did not look hurt. She looked annoyed. I have rights, she snapped. And by the way, I know you have been collecting checks for them. What did you do with the state money? Did you save any of it for me because raising them was supposed to be a favor, not a payday? The accusation hit me like a physical blow. She did not care about their grades or their health. She was counting money she imagined I had. There is no money, Tiffany, I said, stepping closer to her. I have paid for every meal, every doctor visit, and every pair of shoes out of my own pocket. You sent nothing. 0. Before she could scream back. The back door slammed open. Leo walked in. He was 20 years old now, broad-shouldered, and working part-time at the auto shop while he finished community college. He stopped dead when he saw her. Leo, Tiffany said, putting on a smile that did not reach her eyes. Look at you. You are so big. Give Mum a hug. Leo did not move. His face was a mask of stone. Who are you? He asked. His voice was not loud, but it was dangerous. Don't be like that, she said, her smile faltering. I am your mother. My mother is the one who made sure I ate dinner every night for 10 years, Leo said, pointing at me. You are just a lady who visited once. Get out. Tiffany looked from Leo to me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of calculation replace the arrogance. She realized she could not just bully us. She needed a new strategy. Fine, she spat, backing toward the door. Play it that way, but they are my kids, and I am not leaving this town without what is mine. You think you can steal my family and my benefits? We will see about that. She slammed the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. I locked the deadbolt instantly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the latch. I turned to look at the children. Noah was pale, clutching his pencil. Leo was breathing hard, his fists clenched at his sides. She is not taking us, Leo said, his voice cracking slightly. Right. Grandma. She can't. No, I said, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She is not. But as I looked out the window and watched the red car peel out of the driveway, I knew this was not over. The mention of money, the cold entitlement, the threat about her rights, it all signaled something far worse than a family dispute. I walked to my bedroom and pulled the heavy black ledger from my closet shelf. I had been preparing for a rainy day, but as I touched the spine of the book, I realized a hurricane was coming. I needed to call a lawyer, and I needed to do it immediately. The knock on the door came at 7 a.m, loud and authoritative, shattering the quiet routine of our breakfast. I was pouring orange juice for Noah when I saw the blue lights flashing against the kitchen window. My stomach dropped, not with fear, but with a heavy, sickening realization. The storm had made landfall. I opened the door to find two uniformed officers and a detective in a cheap suit. Behind them, standing by the squad car, was Tiffany. She was sobbing, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking in a performance so convincing it would have won awards on Broadway. "Eleanor Vance?" the detective asked, flashing a badge. "I am Detective Miller. We have a warrant for your arrest on 3 counts of custodial interference and kidnapping." The word hung in the damp morning air. Kidnapping. I looked at Tiffany, who lifted her head just enough to catch my eye. There was no sadness in her gaze, only a triumphant smirk before she buried her face again and let out a fresh wail. "She stole them!" Tiffany screamed, her voice carrying down the street to where the neighbors were starting to gather on their porches. She told me she would kill me if I came back. She stole my babies." "That is a lie," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "Officer, she abandoned them here 10 years ago." "Save it for the station." "Ma'am," Detective Miller said, stepping forward. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The chaos that followed was the hardest thing I've ever had to endure. They had to follow protocol. Because there was an allegation of kidnapping and danger. They could not leave the children in the home. Leo, being 20, was ordered to stay back. But he was fighting to get to me, his face red with fury. "She is lying," Leo shouted, shoving past an officer. "My mum is a liar. Grandma didn't kidnap anybody." "Back off, son," the officer warned, hand resting on his holster. Mia and Noah were different. Mia was silent, her face pale as a sheet. But Noah began to scream. "Grandma, Grandma!" He shrieked as a female officer tried to guide him toward a separate car. "Don't let them take me." "Noah!" I called out, forcing myself to look him in the eye as the cuffs clicked around my wrists. "Noah, listen to me. Be brave. It is just a mistake. I will fix it. Do not be afraid." Being placed in the back of a police car in the town where you have lived for 30 years is a specific kind of humiliation. I saw Mrs. Gable, the school secretary who knew me, standing on her lawn with her hand over her mouth. I saw the mailman stop his truck. The town was watching, and in their eyes, the narrative was shifting. I was no longer the saintly grandmother. I was the suspect. At the station, they put me in a small, grey room with a metal table. Detective Miller sat across from me. He looked tired. "Your daughter claims she left the children with you for a weekend babysitting job 10 years ago," Miller said, reading from a file. "She claims when she came back, you refused to open the door. She says you moved, changed your number, and threatened her life. She says she has been looking for them ever since." It was a monstrous lie. It was so bold, so completely detached from reality, that it was almost impressive. "She is lying," I said. I did not scream. I did not pound the table. I sat with my spine straight, my hands folded on my lap. She dropped them off in the middle of the night with 2 suitcases. She never called. She never sent a dime. I have been right here, in the same house, for 30 years. "Do you have a custody order?" Miller asked. "No." "Do you have a power of attorney?" "No." "Did you ever file for guardianship?" "No," I admitted, feeling the trap close around me. I was afraid that if I pushed the system, they would take them into foster care. I just wanted them to be safe. Miller looked at me. He was studying my face, looking for the cracks, for the hysteria that usually accompanies guilt. But I was not hysterical. I was a grandmother who knew exactly what time Noah needed his allergy medication and what book Mia was reading for English class. "She says you are dangerous," Miller said, leaning back. "She says you brainwashed them." "If loving them when she would not is brainwashing," I replied, my voice cool and sharp, "then I am guilty. But detective, if I kidnapped them, why are they on the honor roll? Why are they healthy? Why is Leo working and in college? Kidnappers hide children in basements. I raised mine in the sunlight." Miller didn't answer immediately. He tapped his pen on the table, looking from my calm, weary face to the file where Tiffany's frantic, tear-stained statement lay. I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. My daughter had played the victim perfectly, but she had forgotten one thing: the truth has a specific weight, and I was the only one in the room who was not afraid of it. My attorney was a woman named Sarah Jenkins. She was young, sharp, and initially skeptical. But that changed the moment I placed the black ledger on her mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy thud, a physical representation of 10 years of meticulous record-keeping. "What is this?" Sarah asked, opening the cover. "That is my defense," I replied. "Tiffany told the police I changed my number and went into hiding. Page 3 shows a text message from her sent 2 years ago asking for $500. I replied, saying I did not have it. She read it and never responded. If I was hiding, how did she text me? Sarah flipped through the pages, her eyes widening. She saw the school registration forms from every September for the last decade, all listing my address, the same address Tiffany claimed she could not find. She saw the dental records, the permission slips, and the receipts for asthma medication. She claimed she has been searching for them for years, Sarah murmured, tapping a printed email. But here she is emailing you about a boyfriend in Las Vegas in 2019, not asking a single question about the children. The investigation moved quickly after that. The narrative of the evil grandmother kidnapping children began to crumble under the weight of reality. Detective Miller, who had been so stern in the interrogation room, started interviewing the community. He spoke to Mrs. Gable at the elementary school. He spoke to Dr. Evans, the pediatrician who had treated Noah's ear infections since he was a toddler. Eleanor Vance, Dr. Evans had reportedly said to the police, "She is the only parent those kids have ever known. The mother, I have never seen her face in my life. Not once." As the evidence mounted, Tiffany's story began to fray. In her second interview, she claimed she had sent letters that I intercepted. When asked to describe the post office she mailed them from, or the dates she sent them, she became vague and defensive. She claimed she came to the house in 2017, and I chased her off with a shotgun. However, Sarah produced my employment records, showing I was at work at the dental office during the exact time Tiffany claimed the confrontation happened. Then came the revelation that explained everything. Sarah hired a forensic accountant to look into the sudden timing of Tiffany's return. It was not a sudden pang of maternal love. It was an obituary. The children's paternal grandfather, a man I had only met twice, had passed away 3 months ago in Ohio. He had left a trust fund for Leo, Mia, and Noah. It was not a fortune, but it was significant, about $150,000 set to be released to their legal guardian for their care and maintenance until they turned 25. "She does not want the children," I told Sarah, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "She wants the access code to that account." I did not go on television to scream my innocence. I did not attack Tiffany in the press. I simply let the ledger and the timeline speak for me. But the most powerful voices were the ones Tiffany had forgotten to account for. Because Leo was 20 and Mia was 17. The court allowed them to be interviewed by a guardian ad litem without me present. I was terrified. I sat in the hallway, twisting a tissue in my hands, wondering if Tiffany had managed to manipulate them during the brief time the state had allowed her to visit. When the door opened, the social worker looked at me. Her expression was no longer suspicious. It was soft. "Mrs. Vance," she said, "your grandson Leo had a lot to say." She did not tell me the details then, but I learned later that Leo had looked the investigator in the eye and said, "My mother left us like garbage. My grandmother picked us up. If you give us back to Tiffany, you are not sending us home. You are sending us to an ATM machine." The dynamic in the town shifted overnight. The suspicious glances at the grocery store turned into nods of solidarity. The police stopped parking in front of my house. The district attorney, realizing he had been sold a lie by a woman looking for a payout, began to backpedal. The charge of kidnapping was still technically on the table, but the handcuffs were off, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed air that did not taste like fear. The house was quiet in the way only a house holding its breath can be. It was 3 a.m, and I sat in my armchair by the window, watching the streetlights hum against the darkness. The legal tide had turned in my favor, but the victory felt hollow, like biting into a piece of wax fruit in the silence. The ghosts of my parenting mistakes came out to haunt me. I asked myself the question that every parent asks when their child goes astray. Where did I go wrong? I looked at Tiffany's face in my memory, not the snarling woman in the police station, but the teenager she once was. I remembered how I used to write her apology notes for school when she overslept. I remembered paying her parking tickets so she would not have a record. I remembered shielding her from every sharp edge of the world, thinking I was being a good mother. I realized now, in the cold light of this nightmare, that I had not been protecting her. I had been disabling her. I had taught her that consequences were things that happened to other people, that her mother was an infinite resource to be mined until collapse. By trying to be her savior, I had become her first victim. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. I loved my daughter. The instinct to protect her was woven into my DNA, ancient and unyielding. But I looked at the hallway where my 3 grandchildren were sleeping, and I knew that loving Tiffany now meant destroying the delusion she lived in. It was a terrifying choice. To save the branches, I had to cut the root. A soft creak on the floorboards broke my reverie. I turned to see Mia standing in the doorway. She was 17, on the cusp of adulthood, but in her oversized pajamas, she looked very small. "Grandma," she whispered. "Are you awake?" "Come here, honey," I said, opening my arms. She walked over and sat on the ottoman at my feet, resting her head on my knees. I stroked her hair, feeling the tension radiating off her shoulders. "I heard you on the phone with the lawyer," she said, her voice muffled against my robe. Is she going to take us?" "No," I said firmly. "I will not let that happen." "It feels like we are library books," Mia said, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. Like she thinks she can just check us out because she is bored. Does she even know I'm allergic to peanuts? Does she know Noah needs a nightlight? She does not want us, Grandma. She just wants to win." "I know," I replied, my heart breaking for her. "I know, Mia, and I am sorry that I let you believe for so long that she might change. I don't want to go," she sobbed, her composure finally cracking. Please don't make me go. Mia, look at me, I said, cupping her face in my hands. You are not going anywhere. This is your home. I am your mother now. Not by blood, maybe, but in every way that matters. That night, I made a silent vow. For 10 years, I had kept the peace. I had allowed Tiffany to be the absent but loved figure in their minds. I had never spoken ill of her. I had swallowed my anger to preserve their image of her. But that time was over. Silence was no longer a kindness. It was a danger. The next morning, I began to prepare for the final hearing not as a victim, but as a prosecutor of the truth. I stopped looking for validation. I did not need the town to like me. I did not need Tiffany to forgive me. I needed to be the wall that the storm could not break. I ironed my navy blue suit, the one I wore to funerals and weddings, with precise, aggressive strokes. The steam hissed, rising up like a warning. I packed the black ledger into my bag. I organized the trust fund documents. I was done being the soft place to land. When I walked into that courtroom, I was going to be the rock that Tiffany would crash against, and I would not apologize for the wreckage. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, smelling faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. But the tension packed within its wood-panelled walls was suffocating. Because the local news had run with the sensational headline, "Grandmother accused of kidnapping." The backbenches were filled with curious neighbours and a reporter from the county paper. They were there for a show. I intended to give them the truth. Tiffany sat at the plaintiff's table. She was dressed in a soft pink cardigan, looking every bit the grieving mother she claimed to be. But when my lawyer, Sarah, began the cross-examination, the pastel facade began to crack. "Ms. Vance," Sarah said, pacing slowly in front of the witness stand. "You stated in your police report that your mother refused to let you see your children. Can you tell the court the date of the last time you attempted to visit?" "I don't know the exact date," Tiffany snapped, shifting in her seat. "It was a few years ago. She has a gun." I was scared. "A gun?" Sarah paused, looking at the judge. "We have police reports here from the town of Astoria for the last 10 years. There is not a single disturbance call to my client's address. However, we do have credit card records showing you were in Cabo San Lucas during the Christmas of 2018. You claimed you were terrified for your children's lives, yet you were at a resort." "I needed a break," Tiffany shouted, her face flushing a dark, angry red. "You don't understand the stress I was under. I am the victim here." The silence in the room was heavy. Her outburst was not that of a heartbroken mother. It was the tantrum of a child caught in a lie. When it was my turn to take the stand, I did not cry. I did not look at the cameras. I looked directly at the judge. I recounted the last 10 years with the precision of a surgeon. I told him about the night she left in the rain. I listed the parent-teacher conferences she missed. I described the time Noah was hospitalized for 3 days with pneumonia, and I sat in the chair by his bed because his mother could not be bothered to answer her phone. "She says I stole them," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. "But you cannot steal what someone has thrown away. I did not take them, Your Honor. I caught them." Sarah then presented the evidence. It was a slaughter. The black ledger was entered as Exhibit A. Then came the emails. Then the trust fund documents. "Is it true, Ms. Vance?" Sarah asked, turning back to Tiffany, "that you only returned to town 3 days after the executor of your late father's estate tried to contact the legal guardian of these children regarding a $150,000 inheritance. Tiffany's lawyer stood up to object, but he looked defeated. He was rifling through his papers, realizing he had been hired to fight for a payday, not a parent. "It is my money," Tiffany screamed, standing up and pointing a shaking finger at me. "She turned them against me. She wants it all for herself." "Sit down, Ms. Vance," the judge ordered, his voice booming. The climax, however, did not come from the lawyers. It came when the judge asked to speak to the children, because of their ages. Leo and Mia were allowed to speak in the courtroom. Leo stood up. He looked so much like his grandfather in that moment, tall and unyielding. "Leo," the judge asked gently, "do you feel you were kidnapped?" Leo looked at Tiffany. There was no hate in his eyes, just a profound, empty indifference. "No, sir," Leo said clearly. "My grandmother didn't kidnap us. She saved us. If you make us go with that woman, you are sending us with a stranger." The air left the room. The accusation of kidnapping, which had loomed over me like a guillotine, disintegrated instantly. I saw the reporter in the back row stop taking notes and look at me. I saw the neighbors, who had whispered about me in the grocery store aisle just a week ago, lower their heads in shame. The narrative had flipped. I was no longer the villain of the piece. I sat there, hands folded on my lap, feeling the weight of 100 staring eyes. They were finally seeing the difference between a mother who gave birth and a mother who gave her life. Judge Harrison did not bang his gavel. He simply folded his hands over the thick stack of files, my ledger, the school records, the affidavit from the pediatrician, and looked directly at Tiffany. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes an execution. "Ms. Vance," the judge began, his voice low and vibrating with a controlled anger that was far more terrifying than shouting. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen many custody disputes. I have seen parents fight over weekends and holidays. But I have rarely seen a case of abandonment so total, followed by an attempt at manipulation so transparent." Tiffany opened her mouth to speak, but the judge held up a hand. "You are quiet now," he commanded. "You claimed your mother kidnapped these children, yet the evidence shows that for 10 years, while you were traveling and living your life, she was the one changing diapers, paying for braces, and signing report cards. You did not lose your children, Ms. Vance. You discarded them." He turned his eyes to me. For the first time all day, his expression softened. "The court dismisses all charges of custodial interference against Eleanor Vance with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the established bond and the clear history of neglect by the biological mother, the court grants permanent legal guardianship of Leo, Mia, and Noah Vance to their grandmother, Eleanor Vance, effective immediately." The words washed over me like cool water. It was not joy I felt. It was the crushing weight of 10 years of fear finally being lifted off my chest. I did not cheer. I did not smile. I simply closed my eyes and let out a breath that I felt I had been holding since that rainy Tuesday night a decade ago. "No," Tiffany shrieked, jumping up from her chair. The movement was so sudden that her chair clattered backward onto the floor. "You can't do this. They are mine. That trust fund is— those children are mine." Her slip of the tongue was loud and ugly. She had almost said the words, "trust fund." The entire room heard it. "Bailiff," the judge said calmly. Tiffany looked around the room, her eyes wild. She looked at her lawyer, who was busy packing his briefcase, refusing to meet her gaze. She looked at the gallery, where the neighbors stared back with stone faces. For the first time in her life, the tears, the drama, and the victim act were not working. No one was coming to save her. She was alone with the consequences of her own actions. "Mom!" she wailed, turning to me, her face crumpling into a mask of ugly, desperate sobbing. "Mom, please, you can't take them away from me. I am your daughter." I stood up slowly. My knees popped and my back ached, but I felt taller than I had in years. I turned to look at the 3 children sitting behind the partition. They did not look at her. They were looking at me. Without waiting for permission, Noah ran across the short distance and buried his face in my coat. Mia followed, wrapping her arms around my waist. Leo stood beside us, placing a protective hand on my shoulder, forming a wall between us and the woman who had birthed him. Tiffany reached out a hand across the aisle, trembling. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Help me." I looked at her. I looked at the daughter I had raised, the daughter I had excused, the daughter I had enabled for so long. I saw the selfishness that I had watered with my own fear, and I knew that to be a good mother to these 3 children, I had to stop being a mother to her. I stepped back, tightening my grip on Noah's hand. "I did help you, Tiffany," I said, my voice low and steady, sharp enough to cut the last thread between us. "I raised your children so they would not turn out like you." The sun rose the morning after the trial, just as it always did, casting a pale grey light over the ocean and filtering through my kitchen window. I sat at the table with my black coffee, the house silent around me. There were no balloons, no streamers, and no cake to celebrate the victory. Celebration implies something unusual has happened. What happened yesterday was simply the restoration of order. The universe had tilted on its axis for a moment, and now, with the strike of a gavel, it had righted itself. Life returned to its rhythm with a comforting swiftness. I still clocked in at the dental office at 7:30 in the morning. I still made sure Noah brushed his teeth for 2 full minutes. The only difference was the absence of the invisible weight I had carried on my shoulders for a decade. The black ledger was no longer a weapon of war. It was just a book of memories, stored away on a high shelf. Tiffany did not stay to say goodbye. We heard from a neighbor that she had packed her rental car and left town an hour after the verdict was read. She did not come to the door. She did not call. This time, however, there was no waiting. I did not stare at the phone. I did not wonder if she was safe. I realized that my job was not to save her from herself. My job was to save the children from the wreckage she left behind. The town of Astoria, which had buzzed with gossip for weeks, moved on to the next scandal, leaving us in a blessed, quiet obscurity. The children changed, too. The fear of being returned had vanished. One afternoon, I was in the garden weeding the hydrangeas when Leo came out to help me. He was a man now, his hands large and capable as he pulled at the stubborn roots. "Grandma," he said, not looking up from the dirt. "You know, we never really thought she would win. But hearing you say it, hearing you say you raised us so we wouldn't be like her, that was the first time I felt like we really belonged to you." "You have always belonged here, Leo," I replied, wiping my brow. "I know," he said, pausing to look at me. But there is a difference between being stuck with someone and being chosen by them. She was stuck with us. You? You are the one who chose to stay. I am not a hero. I reject that title when the ladies at the grocery store try to press it upon me. Heroes are people who run into burning buildings or fight wars. I am just a woman who did the math. I looked at 3 innocent lives, and I looked at the alternative. And I made the only decision that a decent human being could make. I did not do it for glory. I did not do it for gratitude. I did it because love, at its core, is not a feeling. It is a discipline. It is the act of showing up, day after day, even when you are tired, even when you are broke, and even when the world tells you to give up. That evening, we sat down to dinner. I had made a pot roast, the same meal I had made 1,000 times before. Noah was telling a long, winding story about a video game. Mia was laughing at him, and Leo was quietly eating, a content expression on his face. The windows were dark against the night, but inside, the light was warm. There were no tears, there was no drama. There was just the sound of forks clinking against plates and the low hum of a family that had survived the storm. I looked at them, my 3 unexpected gifts, and I realized that Tiffany's accusation had been a blessing in disguise. It had forced the truth into the light. It had burned away the ambiguity and left us with something solid. As I took a sip of my water, I thought about the daughter I had lost and the children I had gained. I looked at the empty chair where a mother should have been, and I felt no sadness, only a fierce, protective peace. Sometimes, the most important thing a parent can do is close the door. And as the laughter rose around the table, I knew that while Tiffany had given them life, I had given them a future. There are some accusations that are meant to bury you, but if you stand tall enough, they only serve to clear the ground for the truth to stand on. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on the situation. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Nora Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and smash that hype button to help get this story out to more people.